Let's get going. Welcome to today's webinar on ATSC 3.0. Our speakers today are Kerry Oslund, Vice President, Strategy and Business Development with EW Scripps. Kerry is responsible for advancing the company's 3.0 strategy and other business development efforts. In December 2020, the company's WMYD-TV Detroit became the market's first ATSC 3.0 station. The launch is a collaborative effort with Crosstown WDIV-TV. And as Kerry will tell you, Detroit provides a unique opportunity for the automotive industry to have an in-market test bed for the new internet protocol-based broadcast platform, one that can deliver data to millions of receivers at once. Our second speaker today is Vincent Curren, Principal at Breakthrough Public Media Consulting. His company is helping public media companies navigate today's dynamic and competitive media world. As part of that, he is assisting public television stations in leveraging the power of ATSC 3.0, the next generation broadcast television standard. We will be using the Q&A button to take your questions today. We'll try to get to your questions at the end of each speaker's segment. And so let's turn things over to Kerry. Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with everybody. And a couple of things that weren't in that lovely preamble is that I live in Michigan and I love Michigan. And there's so much happening in Michigan when it comes to ATSC 3. And I'm happy to be able to chat about some of it. I can't see all of your faces, but I assume that because we have so much activity happening in Michigan, that I've worked with a number of you on some of those things. If we have an NDA together, I'll try not to say anything. Vinny, can you show that button again? You're going to keep me honest. Can you show that button?
Oh, yeah.
Vinny's got this button ready, so you are all welcome to use it at any time. So yeah, I have the wonderful privilege of being focused on highest and best uses of spectrum, regardless of standard, whether it's 1.0 or 3.0. So we've got a lot of interesting activity in both. Obviously, a lot of my focus is on 3.0, and a lot of our focus in the past has been really this wonderful joint engineering that we've all been working on together as an industry to roll out now in some 47 markets, reaching over 50% of the US. With mostly simulcast program. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But transmissions are happening. And the other thing that is happening is that there are TV sets being sold. So that is why this graphic says the clock is running, because we are playing pitch and catch now with transmitters and with receivers. The CTA projects, somewhere between 2.1 and 3 million sets will be sold this year. The Pearl Media Group is a little more aggressive on those figures, thinking about 4 million sets will be sold this year. And because we have CTA projections, not only on this year, but in the out years, we're able to really start laying in a timeline of when we think this is all going to happen, and when we reach inflection points and critical mass, and when we start talking about the deprecation of 1.0. So I want to show you a little bit about that, because that's the question I get asked the most. When? We've been hearing about this for 5 years, Kerry. And I'm like, oh, you're so lucky. I've been hearing about it for 10. So the answer is we actually do have somewhat of a timeline now based on projections. And so based on those CTA projections, this is how we see sort of the future rolling out. First off, just why are we going to go there? For no other reason, for capacity. I mean, right now we're at a place where one of our 6 megahertz signal, we can pack in a couple of HDs and a whole bunch of SDs, and we are loading up all of our 1.0 signals, which makes it sort of hard when we were thinking about channel sharing. But the future is so interesting for us because of all the things we're going to be able to do. Multiple, UHD channels, multiple, as many SD channels as you really you have programming for, and then all of the data opportunities that we have. Up until now, we have been one directional. We are becoming a two directional hybrid television operation, and that opens up all of the doors, as all of you know. Just a little bit about where we are right now. This is the new Scripps. Scripps purchased ION for over $4 billion back in January, and with that purchase, along with our local television stations, local television in blue, the ION group in green, and those circled, those are our 3.0 light ups so far. But we are arguably the largest holder of broadcast TV spectrum in America. There might be one or two companies that argue with us on that, but we've done a little bit of the math ourselves, and we have a great opportunity. And one of the reasons we are so bullish on where we're going with this evolution to 3.0. We already mentioned sets are being sold. So CTA projects that 25% of TV sales will be next-gen capable in 2023, 50% in 2024, and 73% in 2025. So keep those numbers in mind as I walk you through a little bit of a timeline, just to show you that there is Excel spreadsheets here behind it. I'm not going to walk you through all the cell math here, but basically, if you take a look at that bottom stripe there, you know what the CTA projects in terms of set sales, and then we've done some things looking at what cumulative sets in the market are, and how many 3.0 versus 1.0 sets there will be there. If you take a look in the middle there, you see what I'm calling an inflection point, where more 3.0 sets will be sold than 1.0 sets. That is not where we start deprecating 1.0. That's just where we say there's no turning back. This is all going forward, and then we imagine it out a few more years, and then we start talking about the deprecation of 1.0 and moving all to 3.0. So that's sort of the timeline and what we're setting the timeline on, knowing that this CTA projections, they're going to be wrong. They're going to be slower or faster or whatever, and we're just going to have to keep changing the math as along with set sales. But we definitely have stuff going on in the market now, and we definitely can project forward because of those sales. Jumping back 10,000 feet, this is sort of what it looks like now. Everything that 10 years we've been talking about, that 5 years, that's all been really, innovation and lots of technology and all of the thought that has gone into the standard. Now we move into that place where we are going to have those early adopters, that first 10%. And then, and you've all seen this before, we go to that early majority, then the majority and the late majority and the laggards. So to break that down just a little bit, the way we see it, we've been at this point and still are, where we have believers, blockers, and skeptics. By the way, that's all in my company. You add in, you add in the cell phone guys and other peer groups, and you get more blockers and skeptics. But there's enough to go around for everybody. So there's a lot of evangelism going on, but you guys are part of this. There's 3.0 and 1.0 channel sharing that's already happening, and it will continue to happen. Where we're moving, in our opinion, is to that place where we have early adopters. And those early adopters are gonna need to see something different than just a simulcast. What if, the first 10 million early adopters see nothing of a difference? How shameful will that be for us if we can't show them that we're able to enhance content and enhance in our advertisers, that we can enhance their advertising and increase their business as well? So we're moving to this early adopter phase. Still innovators and adopters are out there. We're able to watch the install base as it happens. This is the first time we as broadcasters have ever been able to do. That's real data right there. That's coming from Phoenix. Those are sets that are in use in Phoenix. They opt in, and the broadcast signal sends a URL, and the internet pings it back. We're able to get web metrics just like we're able to do with CTV, OTT, and obviously the web that we've all been involved in. So it's really exciting to watch every day more sets come online. What kind of sets come online when people are watching with these new sets? And I can give you a little bit of color regarding that. We have Sony, LG, and Samsung in the marketplace. LG and Samsung have largely put 3.0 chips in their most expensive sets. Let me make a connection for you. The most expensive, those people that can afford $5,000 sets and above, they can also afford a cable or 10 SVOD subscriptions. So we don't see a lot of use yet with the high-end sets. With the lower-end sets, all Sony models come equipped with next-gen or with chipsets that are 3.0 enabled. This is where we're seeing the bulk of the activity right now in those sets that are in that $500 to $1,000 range. As we move forward, moving into an early majority, we'll start layering in advanced advertising, higher degrees of digital right management. We'll keep experimenting and learning. We hope to see, increased yield minimally with addressable advertising early on. And then we start reaching that, what I call the inflection point, where we start selling more 3.0 sets than 1.0 sets. That box in green there doesn't mean that's when we phase out 1.0. That means when we better be deep into the conversations with people like our regulators, the FCC, about how we move from one standard to the next. And there's lots to be figured out there. Lots of policy changes that need to happen. Lots of considerations we need for policymakers to be thinking about. How we can use LPs in our transition over and back. How we can use white space or unused channels as we transition to 3.0 fully. And then we get this late majority. We actually are going to see new kinds of businesses, new kinds of revenue growth. And then eventually we are going to be at a new standard with incredible capacity. And that will be the new normal and the new value proposition. And that is before we start talking about ATSC 4, whatever that is. I don't know what that'll be. But this is enough on our plate for now. So things that we're exploring at Scripps, like I said, we have to engage early adopters. The early adopters, the first 10 million, will have a lot to say about what the next 50 million people do. And if they don't see a difference, they're not going to become raving fans and create the kind of fandom that a company like Tesla can create every day. You've already seen a little bit about probably the part that Nielsen will hate most about us, and that is our ability to do our own first-party data. We're already seeing it coming into our TV stations. Obviously with authentication, we're going to be able to create our own paid channels or partner with other paid channels to deliver what they do already via broadcast signals. And one of the last things I'll talk about today is what we're doing in Detroit and with the automotive industry. Just doubling down on the point that if we don't do something more demonstrative in these early days with enhanced content and show viewers that there's something different, then shame on us. So that is going to be among the focuses of Scripps next year, at least when it comes to 3.0. As the engineering continues and the transmission rollouts continue, we'll also start layering in interesting applications. Think win, play, vote, buy, bet, date, I don't know. But those are the kind of things that we will start creating. Why there's still 3 to 15 million early adopters in the marketplace. Skin our knees, learn what doesn't work, kill it, double down on the things that we think have more promise, and move forward into our new world. We got to create raving fans. I love what I read about Tesla. This is from Omnicom. That what they've been able to do is create and foster a fandom. I think that needs to be one of our next goals as an industry: create and foster a fandom, and get people really having that FOMO, that fear of missing out if they don't buy a next-gen enabled TV set and an antenna that goes with it. So that's it for me, except for a little bit of conversation about what we're doing in Detroit. In Detroit, some of you know, because some of you have been a part of it, we have partnered with Fox, CBS, Graham, and we have carved out 10% of our bandwidth, 3.0 bandwidth in Detroit for the exclusive use of the automobile industry and vendors that want to serve it. We call that the Motown 3.0 test track. That has been up and running since January. We've had lots of interesting companies that have been on the track, new entrants, big CE companies, companies that have tried things out in Jeju Island in South Korea and then come over and want to try it out in Detroit. And obviously the reason we're in Detroit is because we're right under the noses of some of the biggest automobile makers in America. So we want to show them and be demonstrative that we are thinking about them when it comes to data casting, what they're most interested in understanding about 3.0 is it reliable? The answer is yes, we proved that. What is the reception and receivability? It's incredibly robust. As a matter of fact, we were doing some drive tests along 96, and we're able to twist the dials and knobs where we were able to get a signal that was stopping in and about Ann Arbor, where Vinny's from, and then moving it out and clear into Lansing. So almost from a 45 to a 75-mile gain, and just twisting the knobs a little bit with 3.0, which leads me to where the track is heading. The track is heading to outside of the track, because now we have groups that are proving that not only can we provide this affordable service inside of a market, but as a device or a vehicle travels from one market to the next, that it can hand off those signals, just like the cellular infrastructure. Another reason Scripps is so interested, because we have so much spectrum and so much of it is contiguous and overlaid. Even with all the spectrum we have, and all the overlay that we have, we're still, Swiss cheese on a map. And we're going to need lots of partnerships. And I do think there's a lot of room for broadcasters to come together and build a network, for LP operators to come in and help fill in those gaps, whether it's SFN or multi-frequency network handoffs. There's just tons of opportunity out there. And again, with our one-to-many infrastructure, we are able to, at least for the moment, offer data at dimes on the dollar compared to some of the cellular operators. And that's what we're trying to prove and to shout and to tell the automotive industry about, right there in Detroit and right there in Michigan.
Kerry, a question. What is the automobile industry hoping to do with their data? I mean, without giving away any secrets at this point.
Well, they want to update their cars. Cars are becoming rolling computers. And if you think about it, there's a central control module that feeds a whole bunch of other modules. And what they're able to do is update their vehicle, just like you're able to update your iPhone. They can make your car go faster, slower, turn better, obviously update navigation systems. They love us because we can also provide backseat entertainment, all-car audio, lots of reasons to be thinking about us. But the main thing is they are reducing the amount of low margin service calls that come back to the dealers when they can update it over the air. The problem is this costs, and I'm going to throw this number out. I don't know if it's probably directionally right. $1 a gigabyte, where like I said, dimes on the dollar with a one-to-many scheme.
Okay, very good. I don't see any other questions, but if you do have questions, feel free to use the Q&A button. I guess at this point, we will turn things over to Vince and his public TV perspective on things.
That's good, thanks. Let me just follow up on Kerry with the automotive connection. And networking in cars. So, I used to have a 57 Chevy and I would work on that thing. And so I sort of have kind of a passing interest. I'm going to recommend a YouTube channel, Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics. It's this guy, Ivan, works out of his garage. The guy was like a PhD rocket science at Penn State, and he just decided to work on cars and said he loved it. You watch him he spends most of his time diagnosing the onboard computer systems on these cars. And it's amazing. They have high-speed networks, low-speed networks, 12 different modules. It's just incredible. And I think this is like the ability to deliver data to cars is a critical feature in the future. As we move more and more to assisted driving applications, it becomes really important for that onboard computer system to know where every friggin' pothole and lane closure is on that interstate, and they need to know right now. There can't be this, well, we'll roll this information out over the next 3 days or so. And I think we are in really, and my guess is there won't be just one system. People say, well, it'll happen in 5G. Yeah, it'll happen in 5G. It'll happen through Starlink, and it will happen over ATSC 3 broadcast, because one channel is not going to be enough. So I get off my soapbox now. Okay, so let me figure out now how to ignore anything embarrassing on my computer while I go to share my screen here. This is always a dangerous thing. Here we go, here. And then if I go here from beginning. All right, does that work, guys? Okay, excellent. So thanks for inviting me, thanks for inviting me, MAB and other associations that are on this call. It's really a pleasure to talk with you. I will hope to not disappoint. My material, I have to say, is not quite as engaging as Kerry's is, but let's see how we do here. Just first, a little bit about what I do. So I used to be at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I retired from there about 5 years ago, formed my own consulting firm, and I work almost exclusively these days with Public Media Venture Group, 32 public television operations. That some of them are state networks, some of them operate single transmitters. And we're working on these bullet points here. And one of the important things is the creation of shared infrastructure that are beyond the capabilities of any one public television operation. You know, unlike commercial television, public television doesn't really have access to capital markets. And so funding for capital innovation can sometimes be hard to come by. So we think there's more power in a group than in a series of individual stations, and we're working with these 32 stations to try to move the system forward. And these are the stations here that are members of the Public Media Venture Group, and you can see they range from the very largest, WNET, GBH, WETA, to the very smallest. The example is WCTE in Cookeville, Tennessee. I've been to Cookeville. It's a lovely little community about an hour and a half outside of Nashville in the middle of Tennessee. They are literally the only broadcaster in that area. There's an authorization for a low power TV there that is not built. So you talk about being an essential lifeline for their community. Cookeville is the quintessential example of that. Leading up to this webinar, I kind of did my own count. So Kerry talked about 57% of the US. That sounds about right. When I count up the markets, I come up with 39 markets are on the air right now. This is kind of based on what I'm seeing on the ATSC website, in addition to poking around on Rabbit Ears TV. You can see the brown areas here are areas where the 3.0 host is a low power or Class A TV station. And I think that's really important going forward. Low power has some very significant advantages, the ability to flash cut without having to simulcast. And many of these low power operations have very good contours covering metro areas that they really can become attractive partners, transition partners for public television stations, and I think commercial stations as well. And I'll just mention, there is a station on the air in Los Angeles, which I was surprised to see. I didn't know that. And we know from, I think, a comment that from the ATSC meeting in DC, that Los Angeles is very far down the road to having their transition organized. We know that Washington, DC is planning to come on in 3.0 in about a month's timeline. We know that there are conversations happening in other major markets. So Kerry said, we're at 57% of the US right now. You add Los Angeles and Washington, DC, and maybe one other serious top 5 market, and that number is going to go up dramatically. And all of a sudden, I think there's going to be a significant change in the way people think about next-gen TV. On the right, you can see I have those 9 markets where they're public television deployment. So, and there are 3 places here where the stations have transitioned independently and have access to a full transmitter's bandwidth in ATSC 3, which is kind of interesting. And for the most part, I'm going to stay on this for just a second. So public television has not been part of many of the market-wide transitions. They have been part of some. Partly that's because so many of our stations are attached to state universities or they're organs of state government. And if you're a commercial operation and you're trying to work out a transition agreement, some of those stations are they can't sign indemnification agreements, and that's if you're working with a team of lawyers, that's a problem. And it's not because they don't want to; it's because they're prohibited by state law. In some respects, that is actually turning out to be a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because at least PMVG stations right now, a lot of them are turning to single station partnerships. Who's in my market who I can move together just as a pair with one 3.0 station and one 1.0 station. And the advantage of that is if you can do that kind of an agreement, you have much more ATSC 3 bandwidth to experiment with than you do if you're part of like an 8-station, 5, 6, 7, 8 station multi-market transition, where in those cases, there's enough to replicate your HD service on 3.0, maybe do a little bit more, but there isn't oodles of bandwidth to play with. And so we think of PMVG, these paired kind of transition relationships are going to become more important, both because they're less complex to do technically, they're less complex to do legally, and then you have enough bandwidth to actually do some things so that when folks buy those TV sets that Kerry was talking about, there actually could be something different that's that folks see. So with this kind of market transition, and we're about a year behind, I think, compared to where the industry thought we were, but clearly over the last 6 months, the momentum has really increased. And certainly among our PMVG members, our members were in this mode where they were thinking, we're watching, we're waiting, we're keeping an eye on it. Now we're getting more and more calls. It's like, we need to have a plan. We need to help figuring out the plan. What's the plan? So certainly, I think in public television among PMVG members, how am I getting to 3.0 is becoming much more of a topic of conversation and some urgency than it was a year or so ago, when stations were really focused on the impact of COVID and the needs that their communities had. And now they're now turning to next-gen TV and trying to figure out how they make it across the line. So we have these 9 public television stations that have 3.0 bandwidth. So I called and emailed them, and what are you doing? And so what I found was our stations are, for the most part, just simply simulcasting their services in both 1.0 and 3.0. And so if they're in a multi-market transition, they have a relatively small amount of 3.0 bandwidth. They're basically simulcasting their primary service. Those 2 stations that have a full transmitter's worth of bandwidth, right now, they're just taking all of their ATSC1 service, the primary service, and their multicast services, kind of what we use in commercial television. You talk more about Diginet services. They're just putting those over on their ATSC 3 transmitter. They have not even taken those Diginet services and stepped them up into high definition, although they could. I think there are some concerns about, is all the source material there to justify that? So right now, I think stations that are putting 3.0 bandwidth on the air are in a kind of a wait and see mode. And the third station, I think most people are aware of, WKAR at Michigan State University, just down the road from me in Lansing. They're kind of a special case. They're on the air with an experimental license, and they have a separate transmitter that they're using to test the platform, develop experimental services. And they're doing some really interesting work that I'll talk more about in a minute or two. I think a lot of folks have heard of some things about what they're doing. Virtually every single station I was in contact with pointed to ATSC 3 data casting, primarily for education, although there's interest in emergency alerting and weather and that sort of thing purposes. And I would say the other thing, I'll just pause here for just a second and say, at PMVG, we're very focused on ATSC 3. That's the primary focus of what we're doing. But related to that, and related to events over the last 2 years, we have become, and driven by the interests of our members, we have become fairly active in working in the journalism space. So we were part of setting up an organization called the Trust for Local News, for example, which is designed to provide public service options as community papers. A lot of the community papers around the country are mom and pop organizations. Their owners are kind of my age. They're looking for an exit strategy, and there's no place to go right now. Some of those papers are just dying. Others are being bought up by these kind of very big national conglomerates without much local service. So this objective is to try to preserve those kind of local organizations. It ties into ATSC 3. And Kerry, I'll be interested to hear your comments about this because of Scripps DNA, because we think ATSC 3 has a lot of potential power for service in journalism, for news and information, providing our communities with the kind of information that they need, to be healthy. And so we at PMVG, we kind of are going down these two parallel paths here. Interesting client. So just to go back to the data casting piece, now remember I said everybody's focused on data cast. So we have stations that are using the two different platforms that are really out there now, SpectraRep and Information Equity Initiative, which is more of a newcomer that's operated by a small group of public television stations, two in Pennsylvania and South Carolina Educational TV. I may be forgetting someone. Virtually all the stations that I talked to look at 1.0 case data casting as sort of like, it's good, it's providing a service, but it's a pretty bare bones service. And so they're anxious to move to the new platform because of all the advantages that 3.0 might provide. And, like so many other things, this really advanced quickly because of the pandemic. So many of our stations have significant educational services that they provide in partnership with school districts and teachers. When COVID hit and all of a sudden all kids were home, stations really worked very actively to figure out how they can use their broadcast platforms to help meet the educational needs of students. And so the data casting technology thing for education has moved very fast over the last year. And stations are providing some excellent service. And in the course of doing that, the limitations of 1.0 become increasingly clear. And as I say here, most activity is in K-12. There's a fair amount of interest in this kind of corrections system application, where when we talk about ATSC 3 as being a potential data pipe, the fact that it's not internet for many schools is people have their trouble getting their heads around that, and the LTE backbone, back channel, all of that kind of stuff. But when you're talking about someone that's running a prison or a correction center, the fact that this isn't the internet is actually, wow, that's really good. So we don't have anything yet in place, but conversations are continuing. As you might guess, the folks that run prison systems, they tend to be very careful and not move fast to reach decisions. But those are in the works. So we have these platforms. There are other platforms out there. We've had a lot of conversations with Zinwell, a Taiwanese company. We're neutral, and whatever technical platform partners that are out there and have helpful solutions, we'll work with them. And the idea is to match our stations with the providers that fit their needs. the best. And I'll talk about this in a second. Educational data casting by television has some preferable treatment under the FCC rules. This is the IEI platform, and I just put this up here so you can see it's relatively pretty simple. They're using a window-mounted antenna. That's an HD home run box, I think, that's down there with an adapter and a cable, and relatively easy for folks to set up. And we all have to remember, and this has actually become clear to a number. Parents of kids, like my cuddly 40-year-old daughter, they grew up without really being aware of over-the-air TV. So so this has to be simple, because the idea that actually there are these free signals out there, people are like not so familiar with that. So needs to be simple, and I think this and the Spectra Rep platform as well, simplicity is really a feature of what they're doing. Now, I'm going to just channel John Hain for a second and drop this slide in here. John Hain from BitPath, famous for saying, if you've been at any of these national meetings that John's been at, we have to figure out how to use our spectrum more intensely, or we're going to lose it. And there are people out there, the white space folks, in one example, don't mean to single them out, who are interested in, using our spectrum more intensively. And so in the course of kind of working on this educational data casting thing, I came across a couple of instances where TV white spaces were being used for this. And I thought it'd be interesting for this group here. So compare this to this, right? So this is an operation in Virginia, 18 base stations mounted on 200-foot or higher towers or poles on the left. On the right, that's the home installation. So it's a pretty big Yagi antenna bolted to the side of the house with a bunch of cables. Somehow you have to figure out how to get power to it and signal back. Not so easy to install. So we have a big advantage in that our infrastructure is already there. And you're talking about this at the home as opposed to this. Wow, that's a lot better. Now there are advantages here, don't get me wrong. They have a lot more bandwidth, and there are advantages to using this approach. But I think for us, it's really important as an industry, commercial and public, that we talk about these kinds of applications, and that, yes, to our regulators, FCC, Congress, other stakeholders, we are using our spectrum very intensively to create jobs, to generate revenue, to deliver public service, all of those kinds of things. Now, this is the software platform that happens to be the one that IEI is using. Thomson Broadcast, actually, we work with Thomson in a couple of projects. Thomson's kind of interesting because they're an international company. They've done a lot of remote learning in other countries, where there isn't the infrastructure and people are poor. They also have a platform, looks kind of like this, and relatively easy to use, and I think it's great. Now, I would just say here that Catalyst is a research company that's out there that I happen to have a personal connection to, so full disclosure. We at PMVG, working with a couple of other partners at the time, brought Catalyst in last year to do a focus group. They did a couple of focus groups with teachers. And these are top line findings. If you want to get the full report, you can email me. I'll have my address on the last slide. I'm happy to send it to you. But that circled part there is really important when you look at this, and then you go to this. So one of the things I think we all kind of know, but okay, so what does this mean? Is that unfortunately, many students have really poor reading skills. And so if you have a user interface that's very word heavy, that becomes an obstacle for kids. And so, those of you in public television will kind of get what I'm saying when I say this. So to some extent, I think these kinds of interfaces, they need to look more like what the PBS Kids, web platform looks like than like Wikipedia. And right now we're a little bit on the Wikipedia side. So I think that's an opportunity for improvement in the future. But nevertheless, this is all really important. The other thing, just kind of talking around that I found, which I was kind of like unaware of, is that many states and school districts have partnerships that are funded with state dollars and stimulus money that may be behind that, to create partnerships with mobile companies to deliver LTE service, and they're delivering educational data there. One of the unanticipated things that's happening is once these homes get that bandwidth allocation, mom and dad discover the internet and they run through their bandwidth, downloading movies and doing that kind of thing within a couple of days. And then all of a sudden they don't have any more bandwidth. And unfortunately, the households aren't affluent enough to purchase more. And so that becomes an obstacle. So ATSC 1 even, and certainly ATSC 3 has significant potential for continuing to improve educational outcomes among our students. In Michigan here, with Detroit Public Television and other public television stations across the state, those of you from MAB, I think will be aware of this. We have a different approach happening where Rich Homburg said, let's do some education. Instead of doing the data casting, let's put this out. Let's use a diginet. Let's use a multicast channel to put this information out. And so they use they've set up a channel and they run targeted, grade appropriate content on a rolling schedule throughout the day. And our the press has been great. The reaction's been very positive. And so that is an alternative approach that's making a serious dent here in the need. Now, why am I bringing that up in the context of an ATSC 3 conversation? Well, Kerry referred to this. The challenge in ATSC 1 is shelf space. So here are just 3 public television stations in Michigan that I happen to choose. And you can see that, these stations are pretty heavy into multicasting. And the issue then becomes, for that kind of approach, if you're going to put a full-time kids like classroom support education channel on, what are you going to take off to make room for that? Or alternatively, maybe your encoders are now 10 years old. If you're WDCQ up in kind of the Bad Act's great place for their transmitter, but just kind of north around the Michigan's thumb, it's like, okay, you can do that, or you could spend $100,000 and upgrade your encoders and maybe get some more, but where does that capital come from? So the ATSC 1 shelf space then becomes a real challenge for those non-data casting opportunities. And I think as we move to ATSC 3, then we will see a multitude of different approaches for tackling these problems. Data casting will be one, over-the-air broadcast will be another. So kind of an interesting time that we're in right now. Now, if we just zoom out for a second, and I've been in touch with Susie Elkins. Thank you, Susie, and the WKR staff if you're on the call here, to provide me with some of the slides. Susie presented these slides at the ATSC meeting in DC. I was just blown away. There's such a smart group there. So if you look kind of these intersecting circles, this is from a more of a public television view, but I think you can see how these things would apply to commercial television as well. What are the kinds of things we could be doing? Education, definitely. Advanced emergency alerting, clearly. We don't really talk much about audio services, but our stations are interested in that. Many public television stations have companion public radio operations, their NPR and local news outlets in their communities, and the ability to use the bit delivery capacity of ATSC 3 to deliver audio content is something that folks are really interested in. A lot of fundraising potential. I'm actually not smart enough to know what they're talking about with open data feeds for public engagements, but I'm sure it's powerful, whatever it is. And I added on the left there, plus some of my own comments about this. What I was talking about here, expanded linear services. There's a lot of public service content out there for public television, and we will have more capacity to deliver that content, and that's going to be terrific. Kerry, I think we're talked briefly about this. This is something that I think we're interested in as well on the public television side, which is subscription kinds of services. There are niche services out there. For instance, in public radio, there are a very small group of public radio classical music listeners that might have, for instance, a particular interest in vocal music. but it's not very widespread. You wouldn't want to use your broadcast channel. You'll push away too many people. But the idea of doing a subscription channel where you recover some of your costs from producing these highly specialized services and you're meeting specific needs in your community. Data delivery, we're certainly looking at both in public service and for revenue generation. And in commercial TV, there's a lot of targeted advertising talk. And I think in public television, our equivalent to that is underwriting. But I think it's not just underwriting, it's also other fundraising and subscription kinds of services. So if you wanted to kind of look at, so what's the big picture of potential things we could be doing with 3.0? This would be a really good place to start. And then if you're on the leadership team of a public television station, then you might want to start to think about how you prioritize some of these things. And this is also, I thought, a very powerful slide, which is about if you're going to do any of these things, what are the resources and what are the partnerships that you need to be successful? And so media workflows, for me, I circled some of the ones that interest me personally. Plus, then, if you're a public television station, to maximize your fundraising ability, you need to be able to integrate your fundraising management software, web traffic. A lot of stations do a lot of community meetings and they're tracking people that show up. All of that stuff needs to come together and be integrated with a traffic system. And then we need to have a user experience, that app that gets downloaded onto a receiver. That app needs to be both friendly and capable. And some of the use cases, I think, in public television are pretty different than in commercial television. And so we need to be part of the conversation. The ability to deliver content both through broadband pipes and over the air, really an important ability, and it needs to be completely transparent to the end user. And then I'll come back to this privacy thing. And then for corporate, Skip Peasy is a friend who I've known for 30 years. When we were making the transition in radio from analog to digital, Skip would say, you know, we will always, guys our age, men and women our age, will always speak digital with an accent. And here in television, we're making the transition from linear content delivery to nonlinear, on demand, or something else than that. And I would say we will all, those of us of a certain age in television, we will always speak on demand with an accent. So it's important to be aware of that and realize that our thinking is limited a little bit by our experience. What competencies do we need in our staffs? What new workflow design? Let me just come back to this privacy thing. So this popped up a couple of years ago. David Smith from Sinclair was quoted at talking about the fantastic opportunities. And Debbie Dingle, famous in Michigan, had a comment about that. And this was long before the Facebook, controversies. If anything now, this is even more in policymakers' attention. So whether you're a commercial station operation, I think, or a public media operation, you really need to think through this privacy management thing. What kind of data are you collecting? How are you using it? How are you protecting it? And just having an 8.3-page web form that somebody has to click off on that's not going to protect folks. So I would urge people think really through about this. And so for public television, this is kind of the graphic up on the right. If you look, audiovisual content delivery, directly comparison 1.0 to 3.0, people don't really think about this. It's really 5 times the capacity. And so how do we fill that pipe? And for public television, how do we pay for that? And so we have these mission-centric uses. There are revenue-producing uses. And the thing I would say, which I really see in public television, is managing bandwidth here is a core strategic function. In the past, it was primarily in the CTO's office. What kind of resolution are we running? 1080i or 720p? How many multicast channels can we run? But this will take us more to like where cable has been for a long time, as cable, more and more cable channels began to appear. And then, oh, by the way, we're now becoming broadband companies. If you're running a cable operation, how you use that bandwidth passing through that cable, that coax or that fiber, becomes really important. The ability to use that effectively becomes really important to your economic success. I would argue that in public television, and I know less about it, but in commercial television, that is more and more of a core strategic function. So I think I just passed this really quickly for those of you on the public television side. We have a much more complicated regulatory scheme. On the commercial side, you offer one 480 SD channel, you're good. On the public television side, the FCC requirements for broadcast versus some of these new uses are more complicated, and making it even more complicated. So educational data casting falls into the like typical broadcast use, even though it might be data casting. So life is complicated. And so this is where we think public media is heading. I have not seen a lot of conversation in the broader industry about second screen content. And I think in public television, that has a lot of potential value. So you can imagine feeding a parent watching a program on PBS Kids over the air, but with their cell phone or tablet out, and the ability to deliver content to that portable device, which we can do now over the internet. But the advantage in ATSC 3 is we can deliver content that what's happening on the big screen and what's happening on the little screen are aware of each other and tied together. That we cannot do with broadband, at least to my knowledge now. I think that is a really powerful public use case that as folks wrap their heads around that, that could become more and more important. So for now, though, I would say that bottom line, for me, the way I'm spending my time is working with each individual PMVG member and each transmitter that they operate, and some of them have more than a dozen, to figure out how each one of those communities, the public television stations in those communities, get access to 3.0 bandwidth. So if you're operating a commercial station in one of the markets where we have a PMVG member or another public television station, happy to talk with you about the possibilities of doing one of those one-on-one conversions to see how we can get both of our operations across the line. So, so there's my email address, and I really appreciate your time today.
Vinny,
and now I will unshare my screen, hopefully. There, okay.
Yeah, well, thank you for a great presentation, Kerry. You too. I don't see any questions. If you have any questions here at the last minute, feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and we will let our guests answer them.
Yep. Well, let me ask this, if I could just kind of executive privilege, Kerry, can I just put you on the spot for a second? And can you talk, is there anything you can say very broadly, given Scripps' DNA, about journalism and ATSC 3 and what you're thinking about in terms of local information services and how you might leverage the platform?
Yeah, you know, obviously the journalism is the core of what we do, has been for more than 100 years, and it will always be. There's only wins in it when you do it right, and we certainly are a company that does it right. We are highly focused on news literacy right now in a world where we have been confronted with fake news, when probably entering a new season where we're going to be confronted with more. So, you know, helping our communities, whether it's 3.0, 1.0, whether it's CTV, whether we're talking to anyone, it's really about how do you spot journalism abuse? How do you report journalism abuse? How do you not fall for it and make sure that you are a great consumer of news? So all those things are important. And we have done some experimentation with early experimentation with the NAB and a group like FinCons who helped us put together a news literacy application for one of the, I think we were going to show it at the canceled NAB, but you know, it was obviously something that we wanted to, you know, showcase what we're all about in a demonstrative way. Now, do we think that, you know, that's going to, you know, make more money than a sports betting app? You know, we're not dumb.
Right.
And we have a saying at Scripps, you know, two things can be true at the same time. You can be a great journalism company, and you can be a great at all the other things you do, like we do in the entertainment space.
Sure. Well, corporate citizenship is an important concept, and I think you guys certainly are there. Yep. The other thing I would just ask you about, so which again, as I've been working kind of with stations to help them kind of figure out how could they possibly get to 3.0. When I mentioned kind of like the potential working with a low power operation, the stations by and large in public television are pretty shocked. They have not really thought about low power operations as having significant potential in their community. And I know that you have worked specifically in some markets with low power. I'm wondering if you could talk about that experience a little bit and the benefit.
Yeah. Remember, low power is just television at a lower power. So instead of reaching here, you reach here. Works the same, and it fills in a lot of blanks. Susie's experimental in Lansing, that's 5 kilowatts, and it has tremendous reach for 5 kilowatts. You would be shocked on how far that 3.0 5 kilowatt station carries. So look, LP and Class A's will play a role. We'll probably collect some along the way to fill in places where we have holes. Or places that we know that we have to be better broadcasters, where perhaps we are, successful because we're a must-carry operation in one of our markets, instead of being a great broadcaster that can reach all sides and places inside of our designated marketplace. So if we're weak in the north somewhere in a market, we may use an LP or a Class A to fill in where we're weak. We already do. They're called translators, and what makes it interesting is that we see LPs being used as single frequency networks to extend our current networks. But even if it's a different frequency, the idea that you can have multi-frequency networks and pass data and video and audio and not drop any packets. Trust me, we are.
Yeah.
Already there almost.
Yeah, it's interesting because in public television, we do use extensive translators. And somehow people haven't quite shifted their thinking quite that easily to low power. But in Utah, for example, they operate 200 translators around the state. And that creates kind of a different and kind of technical opportunity, which is, okay, so what if you can change those, reconfigure those as a single frequency network?
Yeah, we're in Utah too. And I think Ray Thurber, who's our chief engineer, he's got about 30 of them out there. It's pretty remarkable.
It's head exploding. So Dan, what do you think here?
Yeah, I think one thing that I took away from, if you guys want to elaborate on this a little bit more, is, to really make this thing fly, so to speak, you just can't think about simulcasting your HD1. You've got to do more beyond that.
Right.
Yeah, I'll give you one other thing you have to do. You have to promote the use of antennas. You've got to get fries with that burger. And that means you've got to get a TV set and you've got to get an antenna. Then it all works. Now you bought the TV, now you bought the antenna, now we told you something special is going to happen. It's on us to make something special happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I told, in our prep, I told Kerry about this anecdote. So I live in Ann Arbor. I actually went and looked, I did the search for how far away am I from latitude and longitude. I'm 25 miles away from the full power antennas here in the Detroit area. In my home, which we rent, it's a house in a homeowner association. I can't put an antenna on the roof. I cannot get an over-the-air signal in this house. I've tried every combination of window antennas, attic antennas, and I don't think it's signal level so much as it is multipath. And so Kerry said, well, you need to get an ATSC 3 set. And absolutely, because my guess is that's going to completely solve the problem. But the point I'm making is more that, my experience here is the typical experience that people have with over-the-air broadcasting. And in our industry, we've sort of come to accept it. And actually having the ability to have an over-the-air signal that people can actually receive with a relatively simple antenna, that's like different and requires us to think a little bit differently than we have in the past.
Yeah, and I think that you're going to see our company being super demonstrative about promoting over-the-air, whether it's 3.0 or 1.0.
Yeah.
And obviously we have so much to gain because we have so many OTA channels 9 networks now,
Yes.
and most of those are buoyed by OTA. So we have a lot to gain. And by the way, it is a great technology. And you stop getting those cheap antennas, right? Get up on the roof and put a decent antenna in, have someone install. It's going to cost a couple $100. You're going to save about $800 a year. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, and this is not to dismiss the importance of MVPDs for public television.
Not at all.
They continue to be important, but it's a both and kind of formulation now, and yet not an either or.
Yeah. One other thing I want to pass along here in the chat window, Dave Mann at WKAR, thanks to both for the shout outs today. So
hey, Dave Mann is awesome. He's part of that KAR team, and he's new part of that team. And he has really come on like a ball of fire with 3.0, and he's a great partner. And yeah, Susie and that whole team out there, they've inspired us.
Yeah, terrific. Yep.
Great. Well, thank you guys. What a great hour. And I think everybody got a lot out of it.